Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are on day 2 of the Spellbinders Crafty Advent Calendar for 2025. So every day for 24 days, I'm going to be opening up one of the windows in this calendar and then showing you what the product is and creating a card with it. So all of the videos for the Crafty Advent Calendar for 2025 are in the same playlist. So if you happen to miss one, you'll be able to find them really, really easily. So today we have this really, really pretty stamp set with 2 different sentiment options. So I always love when stamps come with appropriate sentiments. It makes it really easy to use them. So we have a little cluster of mushrooms with some flowers and some greenery. It looks very fall to me. So my color palette for this is going to be fall themed. Now, anytime I have a new acrylic stamp set, I use a white eraser and I just rub along the stamping surface. It removes any possible manufacturing residue, helps that stamp take ink just a little bit better. This only needs to be done one time, so you don't need to do this every single time you use your stamp. One time and it's good. I am stamping this onto some distressed watercolor cardstock because I want to watercolor this image. You can color it however you want. I debated with doing it this way or doing Prismacolor pencils or coloring with Copics. Likely there's going to be another stamp set in this calendar, so there's likely that I will make another card with a stamp set, and I will do that with a different technique. So today I'm going to stamp and emboss on this distressed watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to emboss with gold embossing powder. I figure for a fall themed image, gold is perfect for that. But really it can be heat embossed with whatever embossing powder you want. I did use some embossing powder tool on the cardstock ahead of time just to make sure that the embossing powder was only going to stick to the VersaMark ink that I had inked that stamp with. You could also use just a regular permanent ink and then watercolor. I like to heat emboss because I like that, or the look that it gives. I like that little bit of a different texture, as well as the fact that because the heat embossing is raised, it has a little bit of ridges on it. It makes it easier to watercolor because there's a little bit of a barrier between each of the areas. I'm watercoloring with distress refills to start. I have a palette here that I have all my colors in. I put a little label at the bottom right of each color, and then I use that color to color the label, so I can look right at those labels and know what color is in the well just above to the left of it. Without doing this, some of the distress inks are really, really dark in color, so it's really hard to tell what color they may be. So this is very, very helpful to know exactly what color is in which well and to know the shade that it's going to be. So I'm using my watercolor brush here. This has water right in the handle, and I have a piece of paper towel to my right that when I want to change colors, I will just squeeze that brush into that paper towel and it will clean the brush right out. If I happen to have a little bit too much color on there, I can take a little bit off on the paper towel as well. So that is what that is there to the side, and I use it regularly when I'm watercoloring. I'll regularly let them dry as well and use them for several different projects depending on how dirty they get. Now I'm starting with my background first, so I'm using some Stormy Sky Distress Refill. You can watercolor with whatever medium you like. I really like doing the distress refills because it gives me double use for those refills. They're intended for re-inking distress pads, but they work really, really well for watercolor, and you can get very different or very many different shades of the same color depending on how much water you mix in with it. I like to make the area right behind my image darker and then move my way out to nothing. I will be doing some ink blending on this background as well to fill in the outer edges. Sometimes when you're watercoloring the backgrounds, they get a little bit streaky. So by letting it dry and then doing some ink blending with the same color from that distress pad, then you can even it out a little bit. It fills in that area. Lighter colors don't tend to look as streaky as darker colors do, mainly because there's a bigger contrast between the white cardstock or the white watercolor cardstock and the ink. After doing that background, I'm using some peeled paint to color in the leaves. A lot of these areas are really, really tiny, so I'm not too worried about doing a whole lot of light and dark areas for the really tiny pieces because you wouldn't really see a lot of that light and dark parts anyways. I'm doing the greenery first, and then I'm going to go and do the florals, and the florals are going to be done with aged mahogany and rusty hinge. So again, I'm going in with a very fall-like palette, but you can easily adjust these colors and make like a spring or summer palette because mushrooms do kind of grow in the spring as well. We get them in our yard. So you can do whatever you want. I just tend to think that mushrooms are more fall. And there is two different sentiments you can pick from. One says, thank you so much. And the other one says, have a magical day. I chose the have a magical day. Obviously, you can mix and match, or you could even use both of them. Now, I wanted to add just a tiny little bit of a different finish to some of the areas. So my mushrooms are going to be watercolored with interference refills. So I have another one of these distress palettes that I put a drop or two of each one of the interference refills. Once again, put a label to the bottom right of it so I know exactly what the color is and how it looks. These are the refills for the interference pads. I use them quite often, and I have a whole playlist dedicated to the Lisa Horton interference ink pads. So if you're interested in seeing how I like to use them, you can find all of those videos in that playlist. What I like about the interference inks is they look one way on light or white cardstock, and they look completely different on black or dark cardstock. So it's almost like two ink pads in one, and they have a gorgeous shimmer to them. You're going to see that when you watercolor, but it's going to be more subtle than when you use the inks directly from the pad, because when we're watercoloring, we are using a little bit of water in there, so we're diluting it a bit. So for the bottoms and the stems of my mushrooms, I started off with chocolate roses, and then I added a little bit of royal truffle just to get a little bit more darker color in there. And then the tops of those mushrooms are done with golden sun. So golden sun is an orange, but it has like a pink tone to it. And then the shimmer part is more of a golden shimmer. So I have that golden sun interference pad, and I'm using it on my mat for my card. This piece is just Hammermill cardstock. It's trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm going to trim my watercolor piece to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I always love using those interference pads to ink around my mat just to coordinate them. It helps to not have to try to match the interference colors with cardstock, as well as the fact that you get that gorgeous shimmer, so it really frames it in quite nicely. So once I have that all trimmed down, now I can go in with that Stormy Sky distress pad. I'm using a large ink blending brush, and I'm just ink blending around it. Now I use the reinkers for both the distress as well as the interference for my watercoloring. If you don't have the reinkers, you can use the pads. What you would want to do is press them onto a non-porous surface. Here I would use my glass mat that I'm working on. You could also use, say, an acrylic block or a plate or like a sour cream lid or something like that. Just something non-porous that you can easily clean up and that you can easily pull the ink from. It's a great way to use those pads for a different purpose and not necessarily need to have the reinkers. So if you don't have the reinkers, you can still do this technique, and it will work for any ink that is water reactive or water soluble. So any dye or dye pigment blend, it will work for. So once my piece where my card was assembled, I added just a dot of Stickles to the centers of the flowers just to give it a touch of sparkle, and then let that dry. And then we have our finished card here. A very, very simple card, but absolutely beautiful. And I love the shimmer on those mushrooms as well as the mat around it. And then just that touch of sparkle in the center of those flowers. Thank you so much for joining me for day 2 of the Crafty Advent Calendar. I'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll share what is in day 3. Hope to see you then.